Hey everybody, welcome to Voxology podcast. Mike, Erre, Tim Stafford. And we're just as surprised as everybody else that we're still doing this. I'm not gonna deny that. I was thinking about it this morning. 10 years in October, we will have done this.
10
And
years.
they said they said we would make it 10 hours, and look at us. Tim Stafford,
Mike
hello.
Erre, hello.
Any good pieces of art, music, or literature that you have observed or
gosh.
participated in over the week? Because you're kind of my entrance into all that.
Yes.
Okay.
On
Lay it on me.
Wednesday, we drove all the way to San Francisco and saw a concert, and then drove home that night and slept for an hour and a half, and then woke the kids up.
Oh,
we went
boy.
and saw Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. It was a bucket list
Yeah.
show for me, and it is arguably maybe the best concert I've ever been to in my entire life.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Well, why? Why? What was the?
You know what? On the drive there, we were talking about one of the friends I was with was like, I really need to get into. I need to start listening to some newer music, because we were talking about Willie Nelson, who we saw last summer, and he's touring again. But he's like 92, 93. And so she's like, all these artists that I listen to, are going to be dying off, and I need to I don't have the same fervent love for younger artists. And then we watched Nick Cave perform, and he had his full Bad Seeds band. He had 4 gospel singers, and it was just, I can't describe how just captivating and amazing and over the top and energetic. He's 67. He was bouncing around the stage like he was 15.
I love that.
A presence, and his music is not categorically like anybody else. Like, he's just this unique, and he's just in the crowd, like hands and interacting and all this stuff, so much energy. And it's like it's hard to think about newer bands because they're just not like that. There's not a lot of artists that are like that. Or you go see like the Chili Peppers or somebody who are still in their 60s bouncing around, and just so much energy and musicianship, and it's hard to find that in modern artists. But
so you went from Beyonce the weekend before to Nick Cave.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the spectrum.
Unreal. And then everyone that was there was texting afterward, just like, was that like our mutual friend? He's like, I think that was the best concert I've ever been to. I was like, I got to process it for a bit, but it's already way up there, and it may very well be the best show I've ever seen. Which is great for a bucket list item, because you're like, you want it to.
It lived up
and exceeded. Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
Awesome.
He's a poet. We've referenced his Red Hand Files. He has that email thing you can subscribe to for free called the Red Hand Files, where he interacts with fans' emails. And he's just like, he lost 2 of his young sons, in the last 5 to 10 years, and made an album, a really dark album, processing that, and then a really beautiful record, like delving into grief and hope. And so he processes grief in these beautiful ways and all this stuff. It's just, he's a treasure.
Well, speaking of a treasure, I need to give a shout out to Tim Stafford, who, I don't know if you know this, was just speaking. Tim Stafford has been working his Took Us off in partnership with our friend Brenda, who is one of the most amazingly generous people we've ever met. Because we have a community of people that actually financially support the podcast, we were able to hire somebody to help us think through how to make the 500 plus episodes more accessible, shareable, discoverable. So much of this is coming from your feedback going, good Lord, I'm not going to send episode 419 in the image part 97 to my friend. And so part of that has been a revamp of the website, ladies and gentlemen. And it's been a while since we renamed that we had a new website. But if you dare, I want you to go to voxologypodcast.com and check it out.
Check it out.
Yeah, Tim's put in a ton of work. Brenda, a ton of design and inspiration. Paula, a bunch of wisdom. And we're super stoked. It'll be much easier to share, access, all of the things. We're really, really excited about it. There are a couple of things that we still need to work on. One of those is we've renamed and retitled all the old episodes. And so for those of you who are used to Revelation part 18 and then Revelation part 20 and Revelation part 21, we're going to be coming up with playlists where you can just click through all those without having to sort through them individually. Anything you want to add on that, Timothy, John?
The retitling is for discoverability. So for algorithm science magic that we don't
Evidently,
understand, but
we don't
we're
understand.
doing that. But for this, because of that, when you go on the website, you'll see if you click on one of the episodes on the main page, you'll see all the different streaming services, including the video feed from YouTube. So it should make it super easy to access that. And then, like Mike said, this stuff and the non-friends that's coming up and that kind of stuff is only happening because of people who have signed up to Patreon and Tidely, which is amazing. I was thinking about today because today is a birthday for a Pearl Jam record.
Yes.
And I was thinking about when they did their tour in '96 for No Code. And they were fighting Ticketmaster, and they were against all corporate sponsorship, and so all their posters said "sponsored by no one." And I was like, "We should get."
Is that what we're doing?
Vox merch. It's like Voxology, but I mean, it's important to Mike and I, and we've tried to hold the line on not doing ads and not doing any kind of sponsorship like that, and just totally floating along on you guys. And so far, we've been able to do that, and then be able to cover our
do extra stuff.
Weekly costs, and then try to do these events for you guys for free. Well, not those ones aren't for free, to cover as much cost as we can. But there is something coming up that I think Mike will announce in a second.
Yes,
is also because of people like you guys.
That's right. So if you are in Southern California or visiting on June 5th, Tim and I are going to be, in conjunction with World Relief, hosting a conversation. From Brenda's calling it a fireside chat about immigration. And it's with a friend of mine who's an acquaintance. I don't know if he's a friend, but a guy named Matthew Sorens from World Relief. We've had him on the podcast a couple of times. He has been probably the most helpful person for me to think through how do you reconcile all of the passages talking about the immigrant, the foreigner, the widow, and in the New Testament, the outsider, without showing favoritism. How do you reconcile all of that with immigration policies and the reality of nation states and safety and all those sorts of things? And so we're going to host an evening at Fieldwork, which is in Costa Mesa, 6:30 to 8:30, June 5th. Tim's going to play some music, maybe some Nick Cave. I don't know. Maybe some Willie Nelson. We'll see. I'm certainly going to request some Pearl Jam.
Maybe some Beyonce.
Maybe some Beyonce. Why not do the whole spectrum? But there is an RSVP link that we will put in the show notes, Timothy, that if you would RSVP and let us know, it's going to be a really nice event. We're calling it an invitation to lean in, a fireside chat on faith, immigration, and the church's response. Pastors, church leaders, church members, anyone who cares about this issue is invited. And I'm going to be interviewing Matthew and Tim. Tim's going to be interviewing me through his music, and I will be interviewing Tim through my clapping. So that's what we got coming. And then we're hosting this non-conference in end of July and through August. And so, man, we're just so profoundly grateful, you all, to do this. It's ridiculous. Today, Timothy. So great job, by the way. Kudos to you for to go back and retcon all these old episodes. I mean, Tim is just putting in massive amounts of work to get all this done. So he's not just a handsome face, though he is. He's not just a talented musician, though he is. He's not just a songwriter, though he does. He is a web and ear and podcast expert now. So I don't know if those are things, but today we're going to put
a web and ear badge. I want that.
We're going to put a nail in the coffin of Cruciformity, which irony upon ironies. And I thought, okay, we've talked about living in exile and being the church and what is the church, and that led us to Cruciformity and two different Christianities. But way back when, we promised a conversation on discernment. And so I wanted to share today 5 points of kind of anchoring for me that really in the last year or two, I haven't been able to articulate them. Some of them you've heard before, but it's the so what for me of all the stuff we've been talking about. So like these are 5 points of light if you're a George H.W. Bush fan, 5 anchors for the soul if you're a fan of Christian pop literature, 5 North Stars if you're a fan of astronomy, and I don't know, I'm running out of 5 Iron Frenzies if you're a fan of ska.
Five against one.
Oh, come on. That's the one right there. That's, if you don't know that reference, there's a Pearl Jam reference for you. So what I want to do is just, so what is it? And I'm answering only for me. Tim might even have different ones. Tim might have his first one being the opposite of whatever Mike has. But I wanted to do kind of the 5 waypoints of how I'm going to make decisions over the next few years. I have folks in my very close orbit who believe very differently about things than I do. And we have a church full of people who disagree over things. And as a Jesus follower who wants to be faithful, and as somebody who doesn't want to live in outrage, all that whole combination, but I want to be informed and I want to work towards the good of humanity. How do you do that? So here are the 5 things I've put together. End of story. By end of story, I mean today, because these could change. So just end of episode, maybe. First one, we've talked about this ad nauseum, and I use ad nauseum in a way that's ad nauseum. I really do. Because I want to honor the fact that we've repeated ourselves over 10 years a lot. And so ad nauseum is my way of just to the like 20 of you who've listened to every episode going, you've heard this before. And I know that you've heard it before, but I'm still
You've heard it said, but let me say again.
Exactly. That's what Jesus should have said. So anchor number 1, unless it sounds and acts like Jesus, it's not Christian. Boom. End of story. Man, damn it. I can't keep saying end of story or ad nauseum. Come on, Mike. Get creative.
Period.
Verbally. Period. I have been seduced by the labels that were affixed very early on in my Christian experience to secular versus sacred, Christian versus non-Christian, worldly versus godly. And I've since learned to mistrust all of the labels, all of them entirely, and to just have one. It's just simply this. If it looks and acts like Jesus, it's Christian. And if it doesn't, it's not. No matter what it claims to be, no matter the words it says or sings, if it doesn't act in that way, it's not Christian. Mm-hmm. The very core of the identity of Jesus, the very core of the identity of Yahweh, and the very core of the mission and work upon God on earth, which still continues to this day, is that Jesus had all prerogatives and privileges, but rather than using them for his own gain or advantage, he poured himself out, made himself nothing, expended himself, humbled himself, and took the place of the lowest place of social honor. And that is what we've been calling cruciformity. And so to that, I mean, and Jesus even said, I mean, in John, he has this great line. It's like, when I'm lifted up, I will draw people to myself. And then John adds, and he was talking about the kind of death. So literally the way the kingdom of God comes is through self-sacrificial love. That's the only way it's ever come. That's the only way it will ever will arrive, is that. And so it doesn't matter what the labels are. I've met people who are cross-shaped, who don't know a thing about Jesus. And I've been somebody who knows about Jesus and has not lived in cross-shaped ways, let alone when movements or political parties or ideologies claim baptism of Christian sort of language or symbolism. Man, I stand firmly opposed to anything that doesn't look like that, calling itself Christian. So that's one. We've covered it. Boom. Number 2, who is the real enemy? Now, this one I struggle with, because when I ask who the enemy is, I know exactly who I'm referring to. And those enemies are flesh and blood enemies. And, Paul, we're in Ephesians, the church I'm a part of. Paul has this very famous line, it's not flesh and blood that we're at war with, but the powers and principalities. And so one of the things I've been forced to do, I don't want to, but I've been forced to do it. And I meet with 21 pastors from around the world as part of a little cohort that we do. These are mostly Voxology listeners. And we were talking about the power of ideology and how do you pastor in ways that are anti-ideological.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, okay, is it possible to separate the person from the ism?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has to be.
Yeah.
Right. So the way, and it's interesting, Paul talks about in Ephesians, one of the ways that the powers and principalities enslave is through patterns of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That I never had thought about that. Now I'd always applied it individually, Tim, like, oh yeah, I have to, take off the lies and put on the truth. But I never thought about I never thought about it systemically or culturally or societally.
Mm-hmm.
That there are habits and patterns of thinking that are energized by the powers and principalities. It makes sense. I get it. That's why Paul will say things like to the Corinthians, like, the weapons we wage war with demolish false ideas about God. So who is my enemy? My enemy is the power and principalities. But okay, that's great. All the Bible people would say yes, but what's that mean exactly? Well, I'm doing my best, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, to separate the culture that forms people from the people who are formed by the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very, very okay to go after. In fact, it's almost necessary to go after the culture, and in some cases, the very influential voices that are forming people in certain ways, versus the people themselves who have been formed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not somebody who can criticize people without dehumanizing myself. I'm not somebody that can sit and criticize people without feeling self-righteous or superior. I just have to get out of that mode of life. I don't want to be a part of that mode of life. I want to discern, right? Jesus always is calling us to discern, but never condemn. And the difference, as we've talked about ad nauseum, has been that condemnation refers to people and their inner worth and dignity. Condemnation or discernment refers to action, their words, their deeds in the world. So we're absolutely called to discern. So for me, that works itself out in condemning the isms without condemning the people that are formed by them. So one of the best examples of that is evangelicalism versus evangelicals. So never occurred to me that evangelicalism is a culture that says it comes from the Bible, but it is fraught with all sorts of assumptions, modes of living, styles of life, extra biblical regulations and belonging cues that are not at all found in the text. And the work that we've tried to do personally and on the podcast has been to sort of separate the two. The way in which the isms of America have taken captive this person of Jesus and his revolutionary message. And so I have been one, and of course still am, who's been captured by the isms, right? So American exceptionalism, consumerism, individualism. So if I'm one who suffers under the slavery of those things, then of course the grace that has to be, I didn't start with this set of opinions, I've grown into them. So how do we allow room for people to be in process in ways that we really think are doing harm and aren't right? And the only way I've managed to think about it is this separation of the ism from the people who were formed by the ism. And so I want to be very, very critical. Are you with me on this, Timothy? I'm seeing nods. I'm seeing grins.
I wrote notes down. I don't know. I never know what we're talking about. But this morning, when I was going through the news, I wrote notes down of things just in case if we wanted to cover stuff in the beginning.
Oh, I love it.
And it's literally this.
What?
My notes say, there's a palpable difference in being against an ideology to speak against ideas and talking points rather than confronting practically and physically evil. And that's kind of where we find ourselves right now. And
you wrote that down?
Yeah. It would seem maybe more now than in a long time, what would Jesus do would be appropriate. I think before it was more, what would Jesus say, because it's easier to latch on
Yeah.
to words than it is to latch on to action. And
Yeah. Come on,
so I'm just laughing because you're saying all this stuff that I wrote down this morning. It's just really
dude.
weird.
And for the record, I've let Tim know what we're talking about before, but sometimes Tim is a little busy. So,
No, but
you know,
I just thought it was funny that
dude, great minds.
great minds. But I
Yeah.
really think this is this is everything we've talked about when it comes to roots and causes, where we talk about
Yep.
Malala with the forgiveness is the best revenge, attacking ideologies, not attacking
Yes.
individuals, because all that does is clip something off the top, but it never pulls the roots of these systems.
That's
And then
it,
you
man.
watch how this rolls over into systemic conversations, even about race or whatever in this country. Like, this is
For
all
sure.
one conversation.
All one giant hairball.
Yeah. But
That's
it
it.
asks a lot of you, which
Hmm.
Jesus asked a lot of you, which is what this whole little
Dang.
mini series is about. But it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's so
Yeah.
much easier to adopt isms and ideologies and just be like, yeah, this is what I'm for.
Well, the
And
great
then
appeal of isms is you don't have to think. You don't have to discern. You just sort of
100%, you just take the little
yes.
labels on, and
That's it.
that's all you have to do. But this is so radically opposite of that.
I know.
But that's
It's
why I
really
was
hard.
laughing. I was just like, you're just like, it's like you're reading what I wrote down on my thing, which is just fun.
Dear listener, the amount of time that Tim has laughed on this podcast has been, you know, small. So I've gotten wide eyes. He shuts his eyes sometimes when I'm talking. He'll nod off. He'll violently disagree, but
Violently.
so I want to be super critical of the structures and cultures that create unfruitful and self-destructive ways of thinking. That's why we spend so
Mm-hmm.
much time on theology.
Yeah.
Is I get that you could look at the same text and come up with 3 different, 4 different, 10 different interpretations. But surely, and don't call me Shirley, but surely one of the most important ways of discerning what the correct or most faithful interpretation would be is the fruit it produces.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just sitting and looking at the fruit being produced by American evangelicalism, and you realize you just can't sit and blame American evangelicals for that.
Right.
There is evangelicalism is a culture that is creating, informing, and shaping people, and there are people who are purveyors of it that I think rightfully can be publicly critiqued because they're publicly advocating.
Yeah.
But when it's people close to us, I just get this question all the time: what do we do with the people who voted differently? What do we do with the people that are supporting what's happening in the world? What do we do with them? And I'm like, well, how many options do we got? We can write them off. We can ignore them. We can bypass them, right? We can cut them off. We can punish them. We can be angry with them. We can judge them and condemn them. Or do we stay connected to them, recognizing that whatever their thoughts about X issue isn't the sum total of who they are, and perhaps the way we have been in process in the past, maybe they're in similar processes too. Nobody criticized me into my future. I was always
Mm.
loved, and then there were moments of clarity and conviction that came through people who I knew were committed to me.
Right.
So who's the enemy? It can't be the current president. It can't be the current administration. It can't be the people who voted this way. It can't be people who vote the other way. It can't be that. And I want it to be that. It's so much easier. It's so much more fun. You can tangibly land like blows against the other person. But I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, so I want to be critical of the habits of thought in evangelicalism, the social dynamics, the cultural dynamics, the ideological patterns that have led to some of the things and some of the abuses that we've been, talking about. And then personally, it's best and healthiest for me to approach people the way I want to be approached,
Yeah.
which is giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Dignifying their responses, not exaggerating or doing straw man with what they think or believe, but being genuinely curious. And I know, man, I hear the shout. Yeah, but they're harming people. They're harming people. They're harming people. Silence is complicity. And I'm not saying to be silent. I'm just saying, how do I treat people who I'm coming across in the world who see the world very differently than I do?
That's an
And
important
who
distinction, though, not just to be silent, but that's where the discernment
critique the
comes in.
ism.
Yeah.
That's it.
But how to do that, and how to do it in a way that,
Yep.
doesn't dehumanize someone who is dehumanizing others.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. That's it. That's it. Because I wanted to humanize the dehumanizers, although
Yeah,
I would define the dehumanizers differently.
and I do
Yeah.
often.
Well, I mean, but I just also think I mentioned immigration in our church, so I had a prayer for immigration because this thing in Nashville happened. We've talked about it, and as I've talked about before, our church is beautifully intermixed, and I knew just even bringing up
Hmm.
immigration was going to trigger
Stir the pot.
some.
Yeah.
Others would be cheering. I mean, whatever. And I hate that we live in a world where you can't even have kind of thoughtful, nuanced
Hmm.
conversations. Because what I was saying is, listen, we'd all agree that violent people should be should face the consequences of crime and should be taken off the streets in ways that protect the like greater population. Agreed. We also agree immigration is a real problem in our country. And as Jesus followers, we should agree that whatever solution we think best should involve dignifying every single person, particularly the most vulnerable, as image bearers, made in the image of God. And as Christians, we should have a particular bias to see that those kinds of people are treated with honor, respect, even if they're here illegally.
Yeah.
And then I just prayed for that. And again, it was just, you could just feel what
The
I
tension
thought
rise
was
in the room.
absolutely. But see, to me, that feels like going after an ism rather
Hmm.
than going after a person.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, this is. I'm sure we'll talk to Matthew Sorens about
I was
this,
gonna
but
say, yeah.
there are loads of different ways to approach immigration. Absolutely, but I think we can agree that mothers being slammed to the ground and separated from daughters isn't one of them,
Correct.
even if they're here illegally. So, anyway, all that is to say, there is a bit of advice here, though, and this was really good. So, there's been some research done on what's the best way to approach somebody who you think is a conspiracy theorist. Now, most likely they'll think you are a conspiracy theorist. So, giddy up. But the most productive, it's not at the intellectual level or ideological level, because there's no agreement on what truth is or what sources of information are trustworthy. Instead, research has shown what is most productive towards peace was when the actual issue was ignored and opposing people were invited into projects that were oriented to the community. So the thing that helped folks from other tribes gather and make progress in the world together was people who would do something in that was considered neutral in the world together. There was a years ago, 10 years ago maybe, there was a commercial done by Heineken. I don't know if you remember this, where they interviewed people at the beginning of the commercial. I'll just one of the persons there was very anti-trans, um, and was saying about that. Another one was like about climate change. Another one, very strong opinions. And then they would also have somebody. They would interview somebody at the beginning of the commercial who was whatever the thing was that the other person hated. And then they would put these two strangers in a room and they would give them a project. Heineken did. And the project was to build a bar. They didn't know it was a bar. It was just a bunch of things and tools. And so they would be engaging in building this thing together. They just knew like they were given this task. And then they would open a Heineken, of course, to get the promotion in. And then at the end, the trans person would say to the other person, "Hey, I want you to know a little bit about myself. I am, I have transitioned from this to this." And it was fascinating to see the difference in attitude, tone, and action towards the one person you started the interview and you heard this very sharp, divisive opinion, to see how much that softened when the other was humanized around a neutral project.
Hmm.
And so that's the research. The research is, okay, all right. So we're tearing each other apart on X. What if we both agree that Y is something that we should work on together?
Yeah.
And then after we do that work, let's talk about X. And it's just I was like, okay, that's tangible for me.
This
That's
is
helpful.
that's a human operating mode. Like you think about that and take it to any different category where it's like
That's it.
Newsom here in California is going to start, being more aggressive with homeless camps and stuff. And it's just like, to what ends? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're going to round these people up so they can't be,
Right. For his
sleeping
political
in public or
fortunes.
whatever.
That's
Yeah.
what he's
It's
doing.
like, but then where are you putting them? Because the
Right.
issue is not, it's like,
Right.
it's like what causes people to become homeless? What systems are built that are doing that?
That's right.
What systems cause people to come to this country violently or to commit these acts of the X, Y, and Z? Because we just keep trying to, like, again, cut off the head of things, and they just keep growing back fuller. And
Yeah.
it's like, but to treat the humanity of the situation, what is leading to this? Like
That's
the
right.
stat came out yesterday, it was like 64% of Americans can no longer afford, and it was just 50 like 2 months ago, can no longer afford a house or rent
Oh.
and that kind of stuff. That's a majority of the country.
Mhm.
So that's a problem.
That's a
And
problem.
so it's like, what has led to that problem that
That's right.
enables people to
That's right.
know, like, not have homes or not just be able
Right.
to live with basic needs.
Right.
So it's just
It's
this
good.
kind of philosophy that you're talking about. Just it extends all over
All over.
everything.
We can all agree to work towards flourishing. There are things that the most liberal person and the most conservative person can agree on that would promote human flourishing
Should.
and should and would humanize. So my point is, I'm sitting here. I am an individual. I'm an American citizen. I'm a voter. I am a participant in social media. I am a pastor of a church that is intermingled. I host a podcast with my friend Tim and this beautiful community. So, what does faithfulness look like when I'm making decisions about what to speak, when to not speak, what to do, when to be silent? So, one North Star is, doggone it, it's only Christian if it looks and acts and talks like Jesus. And if you're like, what does Jesus sound like? Okay, read the Sermon on the Mount. What does Jesus look like? Read Philippians 2. There you go. That's all we got. Second thing is to remember who the enemy really is. Jesus could have gone after Rome, and in a way, he does subvert its power and almost makes a mockery of it. But that was really never his target. He was after the isms that held people captive to this very literal Satan, who Jesus taught was real and has influence in the world, but operates at such a macro level about what humans just think is normal. So that's number two. Number three, and this one's taken me a while. Actually, this series is the result of this, or this conclusion is the result of this series. Number three, the table is open to all, but we have to prioritize who Jesus prioritizes. In other words, absolutely and forever, the table is open to anybody without regard of patterns of life, crimes committed, conspiracy theories held. Um, None of it. None of it. We're all gift recipients. But it's interesting when Jesus talks about the table, he's often talking about don't invite people who can repay you, invite the poor. If you want to know where I'm found, go to the marginalized, the broken, the naked, the hungry, those who are incarcerated. That's where you'll find me. Or, hey, Jesus, what's greatness? Well, here's a kid who has no spiritual significance at all in the ancient world. And he'll put the kid in the middle of the disciples and say, oh, that's what greatness looks like. So if I'm preaching and welcoming people to Jesus's table, then Jesus is going to insist on those leveling, the great leveling we've talked about, where the high are brought low, the low are brought high. If that's not happening, then I'm not preaching Jesus's table. Everyone is welcome at that table. But we have to wonder, if you're totally held captive by ideologies that are idolatrous, how comfortable you would feel at that particular table. So it's this weird, everyone is welcome to the table, but the table of who? Right? And if you're preaching the table of Jesus, one of the things the table does is it levels everybody. And if there are people who are too proud to be leveled, or too right to be leveled or too full of hatred to be leveled, then are they welcome to the table? Yes. But would they feel comfortable there? No.
Right.
So I think that's a big, for me, that's been a big,
Yeah.
like, okay, this is how that works. It's not just the table, it's the table of Jesus who was like this.
Which is a full-time job, because you can think that table can be uncomfortable even within just your family, let alone
Totally.
your community at large.
Totally. Your marriage,
Yeah.
right? Your roommate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's yes. The minute we think we've earned a right to be there and then can gatekeep everybody else, that's when we're most in jeopardy of rejecting the invitation ourselves, right? So that's number 3. Number 4, and I know my friend Sky probably may agree, but has questions. First, the church, then the world. That's the order of priority for my politics. What Christians want for the world should first be embodied in the church. So if we want to move away from sexual anarchy, which I think would be a great thing, I do think there is wisdom in the biblical commands around sexuality, for sure. Over applied, legalistically applied, oh yeah, we've talked about that. But I don't think our current mode of operation, where my daughter will come home and be like, yeah, one of my friends has a body count of 20 people. And, and it's like, well, that doesn't seem super healthy either.
Body count.
Evidently, that's how many people you've had sex with. I didn't know this.
That's the term, the current slang.
The current slang, and you'll just sort of share your body counts before you hook up with somebody. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't seem super healthy either. So if the church really is interested in a view of sexuality that is godly and healthy and all the things, then we have to embody that in the church first. And until we do, we've got nothing to say, really.
But not just in practice, but also in the way that we talk about it.
The whole thing.
Coming from purity culture, like somebody recently was
there
like,
was an ism. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was like, that's because of the way that was talked about, and it was talked about with the intention of us creating healthy habits or whatever they thought were healthy habits. But it was all based in shame and fear. So it's interesting because I'm just like, it's one half, it's what about a sexual ethic is healthy, practically speaking, but why? Why is it healthy? Yep. And then how we talk about that from that point forward should change. Mm-hmm. Just as with that example, like it's just everything's such a more holistic, full thing than just like, don't do it or.
That's right. Exactly. No, it's a form of sexual prosperity gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
If you,
it really is though. Yeah,
it is.
That's how it was presented.
That's right. We got to scare them. We got to scare them. We got to scare them straight. And then after we scared them straight, then we got to promise them, a honeymoon of 1,000 virgins, or whatever it is. It's like, come on, man. But like, okay, so unity. We want people to get along in the world, to decrease polarization. Well, I mean, we have however many people you're looking at. And I don't mean church as in 501c3. I mean church is a committed group of believers in process who've agreed together to journey towards this Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that can be 4 people, that can be 4,000 people. Doesn't matter. The point, however, is that when it comes to my own fidelity, my fidelity is to Christ in and through and with his people. Mm-hmm. And that is my political involvement in the world. Now, I think if that happened, our political involvement in the world would carry much more weight and add grace and hope and healing and light. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But I'm just done. I'm done trying to run the world in the name of Jesus. We're going to talk about that. And to be honest, the fact that none of this is new, but the fact that I don't show much difference between me and Joe, non-believer down the street, well, why would anyone care? If it really makes that little difference to be inhabited by the Spirit of the living God and the risen Jesus, then okay. It just seems like a bunch of nothing. So in my imagination then, so I sit and I discern. And what are my discernments? Well, first, This is what Jesus looks like, acts like, talks like. If it's not that, it's not Christian. Secondly, who's my enemy in the world? It's not another political party. It's not a culture war to be won. It's not power mongers to be thrown down, although I would root for that. But it's the isms that hold people captive and certain central figures of those isms that fill the public space with things that are ultimately unhelpful, self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
In my Christian life, everyone is welcome at the table, but it's the table of Jesus, and Jesus is really clear who his preferred dinner guests are. That doesn't mean he doesn't prefer people like me who are the Pharisees of the world. He loves. I mean, how many times did he eat with those people? And think about who he had his Last Supper with. And the clowns show that was that group of people who ran away, denied him, and betrayed him. Rather, it's the gatekeepers that are that if the people who are not willing to see a brother or sister who's an illegal immigrant or who had an abortion or who comes from a different theological tradition, if it's the hardness of our hearts that are unwilling to share a table with those people, it's then us who will find ourselves looking in on the banquet. You know what I mean? Fourthly, my political involvement starts with the church and then flows into the world. So I'm not thinking about transforming anybody else. Although I'd love to. I would absolutely love to see the church influence the world toward hope, towards healing, towards stories that are redemptive, right? Towards the beauty and majesty of Jesus. I want that to happen. Absolutely. The question is, how does it best happen? And it happens best when it's in the church first.
Yeah.
That's historical. That's theological. It's all the stuff we talked about. We're not called to run the non-believing world. We're just not. And then lastly, and this is one for me, Timothy, if we're going to end with cruciformity, this one's the hardest for me. And it's simply this one. There is nothing in the world that is so urgent that I need to get down off of my cross to address. So if I am if the cross isn't just a way that Jesus gets me into heaven, but rather it's a mode of life that Jesus commands, invites us to follow, then, and that mode of life consists of the non-insisting of my rights and privileges, of not using all of my rights and prerogatives for my own benefit, but for the benefit of others, of not insisting on positions of greatness and prominence, but rather taking the lowest social, standing.
Mm-hmm.
If cruciformity is living within weakness and limitation and surrender and disappointment, if that's what staying on my cross looks like, then there's nothing in the world happening that is so important that I need to get away from that mode of life. That's the idea. I don't have to climb off of my cross. And again, we've talked about it, but we need to think about this collectively and individually. For me, becoming a Christian is easy. Staying a Christian is much harder. Because I was always told, and I'm told every 4 years, I'm now told every day, that the stakes are so high that we have to cease operating in Christ-like manners in order to thwart this evil that's happening in the world.
Which used to be a subtle language, but now it's literally that language.
It's literally that language. Absolutely. And I mean, every election I've ever been a part of is the most important one in my lifetime. Fascism is on the ballot. Democracy is on the ballot. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. They're absolutely important. It's how we respond to them and how we imagine them that's at issue here. And so for me, when the stakes are high, what kind of country is our children what kind of country are our children going to inhabit? Mm-hmm. We may not have a democracy after this, it's just so tempting to say, yep, you're right. In this instance, I have to jump down off my cross and engage in power over, demonizing, labeling, whatever. And I have to resist evil with evil in some way, shape, or form or another, even if it's just in my own heart.
Yeah.
read a definition of hate this morning that was to spit on someone in your heart. And I was like, ooh, there's a visceral image.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus condemns hate, contempt, anger. Oh my goodness. So culturally, we've talked so much about, yes, hallelujah, we get an opinion. But that opinion is not our contribution to the kingdom of God, nor is exercising that opinion how the kingdom of God will ever come into the world. And so corporately, we have to abandon postures of special interest, of feeling like we're a persecuted minority, or we're a fearful group that is under threat from X, Y, or Z. All of these modes of thinking are absolutely self-destructive and pull us off of our crosses. And then when you get to individual manifestations of this, our joke is it's always been about evangelism, right? The stakes are so high because someone could go to hell that if you are awkward, if you are pushy, if you're manipulative, if you use scare tactics, all of that's allowed because the stakes are so high. And so Christian parenting, man, you want your kids to follow Jesus, so you have to be filled with anxiety and control, right? Christian marriage. I mean, good Lord, there are biblical roles that you have to fulfill, and if you're not a man, or you're not a biblical woman. I mean, there are just these constant, like, external things that amp us up, so that we think in our very limited imaginations that the only way to do this is to get off of my cross and to mix it up with in the same ways that the world mixes things up. What are you going to say?
That, just to clarify, staying on your
Ooh.
cross doesn't mean you're choosing to be inactive. It's a posture, not a.
Yeah. How passive was Jesus?
You know what I mean, though? Like, I could see people being like, "Well, I'm up here," like,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
told
Yeah.
to stay up here. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thoughts
Yeah.
and
I get
prayers.
that. Yeah. Yeah. And what you realize is that Jesus was on his cross the whole time,
Right.
because he was living in a mode that,
Yeah. So I want to
like, was
clarify that. Like, in
aligned.
case someone was just like, "Well, this really makes
No,
sense. Like, I should
no.
stay."
I think Jesus was the most active person in the history of the planet. It
Absolutely.
was just
Yeah. It was
how.
how. Yep.
That's it. How does the kingdom come? That's it, baby. So collectively, I want my imagination to be full of not what's wrong with people out there, because again, who's my enemy? And first, the church. But I want to participate in ways, protests, statements. I don't know how to do this without religious performance, so I'm just not sure what that means and looks like at this point. And I also don't want to think, in some grandiose way, what the world needs is more Voxology podcasting.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we're the solution here, guys. But instead, to me, I want to live in ways that are surrendered and that are mutual and reciprocal and curious, not judgmental, and that don't try to influence people by being smarter than them, bigger than them, louder than them, meaner than them.
Right.
Ugh, so freaking hard. And so the biggest temptation, I think, for us who try to follow Jesus is staying in that mode of life when everything is so jacked up. I don't think there's ever been an onslaught of propaganda that is so pushed into daily life. And actually, I'm believing, I read this thing, Tim, I'd love to know what you think about it. But I'm almost there. No, I'm also, I'm an Xer. So what are my opinions on technology worth? Nothing. But the line was, discipleship to Christ starts when you turn your phone off. And I just think it's true. I'm paying attention to myself on when I'm on Twitter. It will always be Twitter to me. And the amount of negative thoughts, anger, sadness, outrage, wanting to punish somebody or to see somebody punished. Man, I my heart just is filled with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of a healthy way to hold all of that and then walk in a way that is aligned with the person, message, and example of Jesus. And so I want to be informed, but my idea of being informed is listening to everyone else's opinion. And so I've just started following news apps. So BBC is one. APR. No, not APR. Is that right? AP. APR. That's
NPR.
NPR. Yeah, I don't know what that is. AP. Man, what's the other one? BBC. AP. Not that anyone cares about the extras, but now it's bugging me. Google News. And because so much of what's news now is just opinion, right? Hey, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Hey, this is a constitutional crisis.
Or
Hey,
worse,
this thing.
it's purposefully like misleading.
Yes.
To achieve.
Yep.
A mass opinion on something, or.
Yep. Or to inflame, right? Yeah. I mean,
which I guess is just propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I just think, and so I just read headlines, and I can draw conclusions from those headlines for sure. And I do check X, but I just don't sit there anymore. I can't do it. I just can't, Timothy. So I feel my whole body flood. And I hear the point of, well, maybe it should. This shouldn't be normal. This shouldn't be normalized, Da, 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 da. I hear all of that. You're allowing, would you be silent in the Holocaust? I just hear, yep, I got all of that. Yeah. Understood.
Which I wrestle with every single day. And just talk to my therapist about it too. But I've, as a overly empathic person, we've been trying to work on giving me tools and skills to be able to walk into any environment and not be overloaded by other people's emotions and stuff, which again still feels like voodoo to me, but is apparently real. And so like at Beyonce, I was kind of terrified of going into a stadium full of people. This will relate to what we're talking about, I promise. And having tactics to be able to guard myself and be able to enjoy that concert.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. What would you feel there?
This is what I talked to my therapist about this week, is that I normally am just picking up the negativity in the space. So it'll be other people's anxiety, other people's fears, other people's anger, other people's sorrow. Like for some reason, that's the stuff. So like last year we went to this big festival for Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan and stuff. And some kids near us were bothering a couple people by how they were playing. And the kids are just being kids, but I could just feel the women who were having a bad experience because of the way the kids and the parents were not wrangling the kids in. And it ruined the whole show for me. And then it starts to ruin it for other people when they notice how bothered I am. And so I've been working on these tactics of being able to do that. So at Nick Cave the other night, like right next to me, this man started to get aggressive with a woman, but it ended very quickly. So if it was something I would have stepped into, but it was just an argument, and I started to absorb all of it. And then I had to, like, once I saw that it was like appeased and people were okay, I had to go inside myself and start to talk to these parts and to be able to work through being able to be present in the concert again. I had to do it 3 or 4 times. And then I was like, man, am I a magnet to this? Cause like, but all that to say, like, there's like these versions of being able to show. So I'm working on that with the news, and I'm working on that with, because I do the same thing and I get overloaded, which does nothing but harm me, because I'm not solving any problems. I'm just physically harming myself through the emotional overload and the anxiety and that kind of stuff. But I do want to be informed, and I do want to see, against my therapist's recommendations, like I'm sitting here looking at children starving in Palestine, and I'm watching these horrific things happen because I don't want to turn a blind eye to it. But figuring out how to exist and to advocate and do those things in the productive ways of not just being overwhelmed or over propaganded from people is a really hard, this has been the hardest lesson of my life is so far, is trying to learn this tactic and how to remain on my cross in that way that's
Because the cross is the place of suffering. The cross
Yes.
is the place where you're most aware of how unfair the world is.
But then you see Peter drawing his sword and you're like, this is the imbalance here. Or,
For sure.
was it Bobert or somebody that was just like, Jesus wouldn't have been crucified if he had a gun. And it's like, man, could you have made a one sentence statement that missed the entire thing more effectively than what you just said? Like, and just like you could
for
just
sure.
dissect that for a year.
For sure. Yeah.
But it's like, but that is some of the propaganda that we're being fed now from the
Yeah.
church at large or whatever, or people who are claiming Jesus in these positions, is like, oh, well, if Jesus would have done it this way,
Oh, for sure.
Christianity would have flourished and taken over the planet because he would have killed his oppressors, or I don't know. What's the end of that? If he had a gun, he doesn't go to the cross because he shot all the soldiers or whatever, but it's just so antithetical.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're talking about today is the thing that I'm wrestling through the most, is how to show up and to be present and to be aware, but to be healthy and to know how to advocate in a way that is fighting against these systems that dehumanize, but not to dehumanize myself.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yep.
that's a really hard work. But it's the Sermon on the Mount. It's the Lord's Prayer. It's like, these are all the tenets that when people ask Jesus specifically, like, hey, can you show us how to do this? He's like, this is what he was talking about. This is like all the time. This is what he kept hammering over and over again. And so I'm trying to embody all that stuff. But with the example of being like in Nick Cave, like it requires me in the moment to go in there and really make sure that I'm posturing myself in a way that is effective, or not effective, but is healthy and postured correctly.
Yeah.
And I always think about that with like, every time we talk about repentance and just like this idea of reposturing, like if I am askew in the way that I'm facing, then that repentance is turning back towards Jesus and turning back towards whatever. And so that definition of repentance has been a life changer for me, because growing up, repentance was just say, hey, I did this. Sorry about that.
Right.
Peace.
Yeah.
and then I'll go do it again. But I can just keep praying for forgiveness, and that's repentance. But no, like this reposturing has become key for me.
Yeah.
But again, it requires you to do this for a person like me on a momentary basis every day. And that's the work. That's the staying on the cross, is like, you have to work at it.
Yeah.
But all good things have to be worked at.
That's what I keep telling my gut. So
that's what my yard keeps telling me. Hey, I'm dying.
All right. Well, on that note, your yard is on the cross right now. On that note, friends, thank you. We'll be starting up something new next episode. Probably. Who knows? Who knows what will happen?
That's right.
Who knows what will happen? But we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology podcast, or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /Voxology podcast, or on Instagram at Voxology podcast, and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erre. Thank you for walking this long road with us.